Right. Thanks, everybody, and thanks very much for your patience. It's lovely to be giving this talk today. I'd like to introduce Dr. Catherine Wong, full member of the Philological Society, who's my co-author. And she's been working with me on the legacy, if you like, the legacy research of the Linguistic DNA project since last August. And she is really responsible for the incredible experimentation with visualization that will, I hope we're not going to be locked in forever. On this with me. So we will co-present this. As Lutz intimated, it's really an exploratory foray really into visualization to see if it can help us understand patterns more easily. So our outline, we'll talk a little bit about the background in case you don't know about linguistic DNA. We'll talk about our methods of procedures, and then we'll spend quite a lot of time showing you some of the results of this work. So, linguistic DNA refers to an AHRC funded project. Can you hear? Okay. Yeah. Which ran formally between 2015 and 2018. It was a big project. We had the core team consisted of colleagues at University of Sheffield, principally in the Digital Humanities Institute. And you can see Seth Mehl there, who was a postdoc on the project, Mike Pidd, who is director of the DHI, Matt Groves, who is a software developer, Iona Hine is another postdoc. And then we had this collaboration with Mark Alexander at Glasgow and the postdoc Fraser Dalakey. And last but certainly not least, Justina Robinson at the University of Sussex as a historical semanticist. So this effort was really designed and aimed to understand how concepts and ways of thinking changed in the course of early modern English. And we used computational methods to identify billions of lexical patterns in a particular corpus, and that was Early English Books Online, the text creation partnership version. And what this did was, fundamental to this was the desire to explore the possibility of creating a bottom-up method to discover concepts that were prominent in a universe of early modern discourse. And that meant generating concepts as output rather than using keywords as input. And this meant seeking ways to understand conceptual structures in ways other than keywords. So drawing on philological and discourse theories of semantics, Seth and I explore this in a forthcoming chapter in the new Cambridge History of the English Language. We sought to locate conceptual meaning in discourse, and this led to our operationalizing discursive meaning as a set of associated expressions in discourse, and what we termed a discursive concept. On the technical side, the linguistic DNA software engineers built an automated processor to generate linguistic output that could be identified as containing conceptual matter. And that was a process we called linguistic concept modeling. And this basically consisted of generating co-occurring lemmas in pairs, and then in trios, and then in quads for every lemma that occurs above a particular frequency threshold in the corpus. That means the data consists of billions of these quads, and these quads are sets of 4 co-occurring lemmas that are strongly associated with one another within a 100-word stretch of text. So what the linguistic demonstrator does is it illustrates the kind of data yielded by the methods, and it provides a way in to ascertaining the prominence, density, and frequency of these concept models, and we present those as quads headed by node words. So the output, so we can show you this is the linguistic concept modeling demonstrator. If we click on, say, all of the quads for ACT, we can see that the output, the concept modeling, is a list of quads identified, ranked, and sorted using quantitative measures. Now, the strength of the co-occurrence, the strong association, is measured by mutual information score, and you can hover over and explore that a bit more frequently. And this was adapted specifically by Seth for use in this project. Now, and then you can also look at it in terms of occurrence, and you can look at the most highly frequently occurring things, quads. Because the process is computationally very expensive, very high frequency thresholds were applied, and that yielded quads around very high frequency node words. For example, God is a stop word because it is so, I mean, it just occurs everywhere. So you just get God would be everywhere. So we excluded them effectively. So you can tap into this into the website and play with that online at your leisure, should you wish. So what we've done till now, we've tried to demonstrate how the semantic-pragmatic process of mapping meaning onto quads can be conducted using iterative processes of hypothesizing meanings and then testing that in the context of other sources of information, including encyclopedic information. So I mentioned before, the theory of semantic change we've adopted assumes that meaning is located in discourse. And I'll say that the first forays into this work were tortuous, to say the least. Lutz referred to the article in Transactions. I'm very proud that it was one of the most frequently downloaded articles, but it also attracted some rather curious letters about the absurdity of the process from some long-term members of the Philological Society, which, if you're interested, I will share with you one day. Anyway, the challenge really was to ascertain the semantic nature of this strong association calculated by that MI score between the node lemma and the first lemma, for example. Okay, and then the pair with the trio and the trio with the fourth element. And I experimented by applying a set of pragmatic routines informed by a relevance theory to identify the developing conceptual meaning in a stepwise manner, forming a hypothesis about the association and testing its robustness as I added the next lemma to the association. So we can see, I think, if we looking at this, we can perhaps look at how it's possible to delve into some of that meaning. So this top quad here consists of water, dram, half, and ounce. We can hypothesize that maybe it has something to do with measurement. Ounce is a measure of something small, and we can then look into at first glance into some of the titles that contain that quad in some numbers. So testing the hypothesis by looking at the titles of these documents, and we could look at that, various things, physical receipts and the cure of the plague and so on, that a lot of these texts have to do with early modern pharmacology, as it were, the work of mixing potions and remedies for the treatment of various ailments. And they include work, should you wander down the list of many texts, some highly influential medical practitioners like Thomas Willis and experimental scientists like Robert Boyle. So the concept model for these particular quads with the node water would seem to, this is very shorthand, you understand, would be the measure and method for mixing remedies. And notice that we could go then into the text in some detail, we will in a moment. But what we want, this clearly has some strengths, and the strengths of that kind of delving deeply into the texts allows us to explore the meanings of sets of related quads as discursive concepts, and to test the hypothetical meanings by delving into the texts in which the quads occur. So again, we look at these examples. What we have here is a number of, this is a constellation of quads associated or arranged, if you like, around the node word blood. And there are 14 unique quads here. But what we, if we scroll down through these quads, we will see that we actually start to see a degree of concentration around the node word blood of really the religious concept of the Eucharist. So we've got bread and consecration, Eucharist itself, so transubstantiation, and so on. And that seems to be pretty dominant and would not surprising in this corpus. But what we also have is two quads that summon a different interpretation. So that very top one there, we've got blood, artery, and heart and vein. And using encyclopedic information, we can reasonably assume that these quads have to do with the nature of blood as a human corporeal property rather than a divine element of the Eucharist. And if we click through again to the texts, for example, and look at the things that show up, we can see again, there's we can see that we've got basically in this lot there are about 259 texts, and many of these texts are concerned with the treatment of disease of the human body. So they are handbooks of surgery, there may be midwives' guides, and they therefore contain descriptions of how blood is transported to and from the heart via veins and arteries. So in this case, as in other analyses of concept models in various studies up until now, we can discern secular strands of discourse despite the apparent predominance of ecclesiastical, liturgical, and otherwise religious language, which is all very well. But then we have to say, well, what are the weaknesses of this particular method? Well, the real problem here is that it's hard to get the bigger picture. How can we map meaning onto significantly larger sets of quads other than those selected few which seem quite helpfully to fit together? The sheer volume of data prohibits the painstaking analysis as explored up until now at scale. And of course, that means that we lay ourselves open to the charge of cherry picking, or worse, navel gazing, without some way to really grasp the bigger picture. So this is what really prompted our research questions. So the first is, well, can we assume a different, distant perspective to analyze the data? For instance, can we use visualization as a potential tool to identify patterns within large sets of quad data and to guide our interpretation? So Catherine's been experimenting with different kinds of visualization techniques, and here we report on the progress of that work. So in pursuit of these questions, we are going to look at specific constellations because there's just so much, and we are exploring this. And it's constellations that invite interrogation both as secular and religious discourses. So we experiment with some visualizations and try to build hypotheses about the range of conceptual interpretations. So moving on to our methodology, first of all, I'll talk a little bit about the data. It's Early English Books Online, or EBO-TCP. It's huge. It consists of 146,000 titles. It has diverse genres, history, philosophy, linguistics, politics, and government. And it yields something like 1.6 billion tokens. We applied statistical methods to the quads, then generated by linguistic DNA concept modeling, then to try to ascertain the density and complexity of conceptual construction, as well as the corresponding relations between different concepts in early modern English discourse. So we specifically look at the constellations of quads generated around three particular node lemmas. One is heaven, one is church, and the other one is earth. And we choose these to examine how far the three are oriented to religious discourses and whether there are any secular imperatives to be found. And I'm going to hand over to Catherine to talk. Oops. There we go. The procedures. Over to you, Catherine.
Yeah, thank you, Susan. And yeah, so when it comes to the procedures, so we experiment with the data visualizations to seek a more holistic overview of a very large quantity of data. To do this, we explore each constellations, and that is like the sum of the quads, set up by 4 highly frequent common co-occurring lemmas, including the node lemmas. And the size and density of the constellation around the node word enable us to approach some understanding of the complexity of the discursive concepts and it encapsulates. And by computing the frequency of co-occurring lemmas in each constellation, we can start to think about the conceptual similarities and differences among these constellations, and to see how far there are common strands or themes across constellation. And we also conduct the third one, and that is conduct a basic intuitive classification of lemmas to organize them. And then finally is we derive codes from comparable historical thesaurus of English, semantic categories, and then apply them to lemmas in all the three constellations to explore the relationship among the concepts and also the discourses within EBO TCP. So this chart also illustrates the step taken to explore this visualization. So step one, the first step at the beginning is we calculated the number of co-occurring unique words and the number of co-occurring words and the relative frequency around the node lemmas to identify first is the size and also the complexity of each constellation. And each constellation is presented as Sankey diagram, and which Susan will show you later on. And the second step that we did is we extracted the shared co-occurring lemmas among these constellations of node lemmas and calculate the frequency of the co-occurrence to ascertain then the significance to these concept constructions. And after that, step three, and we also conduct some thematic clustering of lemmas within these constellations to see the composition and also the distribution of themes which shape the concepts. And we conduct a basic taxonomic classification exercise to group lemmas. And then after that is we also express these as circle diagrams. Again, as you will show it, you can see it later on. And finally is and when after using these circle diagrams is it can provide is the basis for the applications of code based on the semantic subcategories in the historical thesaurus of English. And the final step, and we also assign is the historical thesaurus derived codes to lemmas in each constellation, and to ascertain the extent to which the constellations occur in the same range of discourses in EBO TCP, and therefore we can evaluate the corresponding relation between concepts and also discourse senses. And now as I will pass the time back to Susan, and she will discuss with you is our findings. Thank you.
It's a bit of a double header here from now. So what did we find? So this first, this really is a visual summary then of each of the, and I'll show you them better in a minute, constellations headed by the node words church, heaven, and earth. So we were interested in the extent to which we might discern religious themes as well as secular concepts across these constellations and the discourses associated with them. So the Sankey diagrams, these are Sankey diagrams, provide visual representation of the size of each constellation, so the number of quads making it up, together with the range and extent of the co-occurring lemmas in the quads in terms of their place in the quads. What we can't see here is the frequency of occurrence of each quad in the data set. It's only represented by a single unique one. So let's have a look in a bit more detail. This is church. To read this, note that church is the node lemma, and we can see what lemmas co-occur here. And what's striking, we can see some concentrations. So we can see the presence of the co-occurrence with bishop, for example, and the huge number of fairly different lemmas that occur in third place in these quads. And we can also come over to look at the fourth place, and it's quite interesting. We can see things like presbyter and various things like that. So this is really quite interesting because it allows us to look at the whole constellation and try to begin to well, it's a different way in to starting to make inferences about the relationships among the co-occurring lemmas in each quad. Here's heaven. This reveals an apparently less complex constellation, but with a big range of co-occurring lemmas. And again, we can begin to make inferences about the nature of the discourses indicated by the quads. What is striking here is how heaven co-occurs with earth in second position, really, but it also can occur with earth, other quads, also around the node word heaven in third position. So what we see is, and look at the very interesting range of elements that appear to that occur in the last position. And then we can look at the constellation for Earth. Again, it looks quite different again. There are sets of quads sharing co-occurring lemmas, and it gives the impression of less complexity and a smaller range of co-occurring lemmas. And again, notice that what's interesting here is that church co-occurs with earth and heaven, and we can see different kinds of relationships that begin to build up. We can show you the tables underpinning these later, should you be so interested, but I think we'll press on for now. So the complexity then of the complexity of the constellations is expressed in the size of the constellation and the frequency of distinct co-occurring lemmas across the quads. So you can see this here. So church the size is 276 quads. Obviously, there's only one church, and then you can see the range of lemmas that co-occur with church by place, and you can see how that pans out with respect to the other two constellations. Okay, here we can actually look at the extent to which we have co-occurring lemmas common lemmas in heaven, church, and earth. So this is a table shared of lemmas shared or not shared among the constellations, alphabetically arranged, and you can see that the presence of the lemma in the constellation is marked by green, yes, and by red by no. They do share, as we've already discerned at a very superficial level, a number of those lemmas. So, for instance, church constellation contains a large number of lemmas that don't occur in the heaven or earth constellations or in the same quad location, but a number of them are shared between heaven and earth. And the ones that are shared right across the board include examples such as apostle, bind, body, day, father, head, holy, kingdom, Lord, which we'll come back to, and a number of others. So given that some lemmas in each constellation occur in each of the others, one of the others, within the quads that make up the constellation, we might ask whether this has any bearing on the range of conceptual meanings captured in those constellations and how much of that meaning is shared by the constellations together. And so if we look at the co-occurrence of lemmas and the possible correlation with concepts, we can comb into the kinds of lemmas that typify church, for instance, and they seem to be, and I mentioned before with the Sankey diagram, bishop, and you've got presbyter, which goes to like fourth place, and a number of roles, hierarchical roles within a church, within the church constellation. Lord, interestingly, is present in each of the constellations. Heaven, the heaven constellation obviously includes a node word earth. It also includes church, and similarly, earth does the same thing, kind of reciprocates. Let's give you an example from a church quad, because if these items are co-occur, the question is, what does that signify? So we thought we'd dive into one of the texts. So here's an example with church, bishop, power, and presbyter, and we can see that this is an interesting text actually. It's a single pamphlet. It's from the Thomason Tracts. It's published in 1660, and it is an appeal to the restored king, and it's by the bishops, and it's basically basically says we cannot here, but adore divine goodness for your majesty's steadfast adherence to the Protestant religion, notwithstanding all temptations and provocations to the contrary, and your professed zeal for the advancement and propagation thereof. So it's all about church government and the appeal to the king to make sure that he adheres to Protestant ideals and rules in doing so. So here we have an appeal to the king, but it's clearly a highly political kind of text. If we look at an example, very prominent example here for earth bind, heaven and loose. Similar, we've got several snippets of text in which the quad occurs. And in this one, this is maybe unsurprisingly, it's a model of the government of the church under the gospel by presbyters. So again, what we have here is actually, it looks as though it's just simply going to be potentially a religious text. It invokes the Bible, Matthew 18, but it does so in the service of ensuring that church government is not messed about with effectively. So that's by way of example there. We look at the thematic clustering of these lemmas, and we focus on the co-occurring lemmas within and across constellations. What we did was we experimented with some simple categories or themes to cluster them. So we started to think about looking at these in terms of things like the roles, and mentioned the bishop and presbyter and so on. Nature, so we've got air and cloud further down here, the elements of that. And then we can look at body, name, and to complete it, supernature. What we did then was to express these as circle diagrams, showing the relative prominence in terms of the frequencies of lemmas in these thematic categories. And what you can see those quite nicely, I think. So you can see that in the church constellation, what seems to be very prominent is roles and hierarchy. And with the heaven constellation, we've got roles and hierarchies to be sure, but nature seems to feature, and similarly in earth. We can look at this expressed as a bar chart, which simply underpins the extent to which these are very different sizes of constellation. Let's look at this a little bit more closely. The dominating themes in each of these themes roles and hierarchy seem to mark church and sets that quite clearly apart. But what we can do too is further look at the extent to which roles and hierarchy are really the same thing across all three constellations. And actually, if we look at it a little bit more closely, I think you can see this. Within the church constellation, we can see the predominance of bishop, presbyter, apostle, and there are other kinds of things in there as well. But if we look at heaven, there's a very different array of roles looked at intuitively here. Lord, we've got Lord, Father, and so on. And then, of course, for earth, we've got Lord again, but here it's rather different. So we got King. So this suggests then that it may actually be a little bit like while roles and hierarchy works as a kind of a superordinate category, we probably need more nuanced ways of interrogating how they actually work within the constellations in order to properly draw out this meaning. So this is when we turned to the historical thesaurus as the authoritative source of semantic categories for the history of English, to try to develop this more nuanced understanding of how roles and hierarchies in particular work in each constellation. So we mapped the lemmas categorized as belonging to that category, roles and hierarchies in each of the heaven, church, and earth constellations onto a set of codes for law. And we align these with the semantic categories derived from the historical thesaurus to try to explore how far the discourses uncovered by the constellations have to do with God's language, heaven, ecclesiastical or church language, or church, or human language, say from the earth. So we applied these to the lemma lists classified as falling under this roles and authorities for each constellation and experimented with a different form of visualization. I'm going to hand you over to Catherine again.
Yeah, so here's the visualization or a visual illustration of like how we broke down the supercategory of role and hierarchy in order to interrogate the extent to which the three constellations share the same discourses. And so in this project, in this study, okay, the definition of law is based on Thomas Aquinas' classification in the Treatise on Law, in which he introduced the 4 categories of law here, and that is the eternal law, and that's God's plan or the purpose of all things, and the divine law. And in the original treatise, and this is in the 4th the 4th law introduced, but because I want to rearrange the order to fit into our discussion, and this is why I put it in the 2nd place. And so this is primarily coming from the Bible, guidelines to attain eternal happiness. The 3rd one is natural law, and that is our partaking in the eternal law, which leads to primary precepts, and that is morality and good and evil. And the last one is human law, and humans making specific laws to capture the truths of natural laws, which lead to the secondary precepts. And then at the same time is the historical thesaurus of English classifies all words into 3 categories. Namely, is number 1 is the world, number 2 that is not included in this diagram is the mind, and the last one is society. And where the concepts of law can be found under the first and the last category, and that's the world and also society. And once we have formed our defining principles, the next thing what follows is that we have to determine the way we apply our codes on the lemmas by matching them or mapping them against the classifications in the historical thesaurus of English. And so you can see there is the first one is lemmas under the subcategory of life and death, matter, existence, and causation. From the first category, the world, all coded as eternal law. And consider divine law just as this category of law is rooted in faith and also doctrine found in the 2 Testaments. And lemmas under the subcategories of deity, okay, that is coming from category of the world, and also is a subcategory of faith that's coming from the category number 3, that is society, mapped as divine law. And next is we move on to rituals and church government. This is actually a subcategory created by ourselves, because we extend the basic coding principles to lemmas under the subcategories of church government and worship. Those are from category 3, that is society of the historical thesaurus, to the new subcategory of law likened to the convention created by or derived from is community standards of the divine law, or evolved from is the interpretation of the New Testament. And the last 2 types of law is pretty straightforward. And what we can see is lemmas under morality are coded as natural law, whereas those under the category of customs, values, civilizations, authority, and also the law itself, okay, are all coded as human law.
Okay. So then the question was, where do these lemmas then fit into the schema? So as I said, we applied each of these codes to all of the lemmas categorized by roles and hierarchy in all 3 constellations. And this yields a radial tree that reflects the relative distribution of lemmas in each constellation across the codes. And so what we can do is we can look at the church constellation here and look at the relative prominence of these codes here. And unsurprisingly, rituals and church government is incredibly frequent here. Note the range of roles within this. And what we can do to look at the complexity of that and the distribution is to see, and it basically confirms what we thought, bishop and presbyter occur really frequently, but look at the array of roles that are associated with the church constellation. It is really quite extensive. This is very pretty, but we won't dwell on it right now. But within the three constellations, the next prominent code, but by far less, is human law, right? And so let us look at heaven with respect to human law and look at the distribution of roles. And you'll see that we see Lord really prominent there, but there's not a lot else. They're just relatively few. Interestingly, we've got nation, thief, kingdom, and trespass. Again, we get a nice, pretty picture if we do this, which we can play with later. But then if we go to earth, again, looking at human law, earth shares with heaven some of those prominent roles. And again, they're not numerous, but they're distributed in a really rather interesting way. We may as well, while we're here, find out what the constitution of human stuff is with respect to church. And again, it's really quite striking, but it's different. Lord is certainly represented here, but then unsurprisingly, we have the paraphernalia, the infrastructure of church governance with councils, authorities, provinces, cities, governments, and so on. All of these things begin to come into place. Okay, so let's look at an example. We'll have an example from the Earth constellation to see what role Lord might be playing here. And again, this occurs really quite frequently. It also occurs this quad occurs in 475 documents. So, but what we get from this is that Lord is very present in both earth and heaven. This is the sinner's redemption. So it is a hymn, and we see absolutely marked all over the place the reference to Lord, but it's a Lord Jesus Christ. That is what this Lord is here, and that is very marked. You can see by the highlighted lemmas, and if we spent any more time on this, you would be able to see that. Okay, so if we look at then the thematic correspondence of concept and discourse, we've already looked at this. So what we then can think about is we've got a pretty good fit here. But I think the example that we just looked at illustrates that visualizations can really help us to explore similarities. And what's that one? At 23. Okay. Sorry, I've gone too fast. I'm just looking at people looking so tired here. Okay. That's all right. Yeah, it's good. So it summarizes the assignment, okay, of the 5 law codes to the lemmas. And it reflects the different constellation sizes as per the lemma frequencies, as we've already said, and it shows a high level of fit. So the application of codes, yeah. Yeah, got it. Yeah, got it, definitely. But I think that what we've got to do finally, I mean, if we look at we've got to delve back into the texts really to understand the relationships. So what we see, I think, is that God's language, for example, so that's eternal law and divine law, is effectively subordinated to church language, which is the rituals and the government. And then both of these effectively are subordinated to man's language, that's human law and natural law. But if we look at the content of the lemmas coded as human law, we see that what we've got is men talking to God. Natural law subsumes terms such as father and son, and clearly the heaven and earth constellations privilege human law, but it's language used to and about God. So where does this leave us? Well, I think what we've done here is to experiment with different kinds of visualization as useful organizing methods. Firstly, to better frame and contextualize the work of building hypotheses about discursive meanings in their discourses, and to better direct the close reading of the texts underpinning the discourse. Because compared with where we were at the start, here we can look at visualization to help us, to direct us into particular ways into the text, rather than picking particular quads as a way of trying to explore them. So instead of picking on sets of quads to discern conceptual connections and differences from those parts of the quad data that we can apprehend easily by eye, the visualizations can offer different ways into seeing the meanings and their discourses. So if we come back to our questions, can we assume a different distant perspective? I think we can. We've seen beyond the quad variations presented by the demonstrator, and we've looked at patterns that exist in and across numerous constellations of quads. And we also asked the question, can we use visualization as a potential tool to identify patterns and to help guide interpretation? And yeah, I think we can. We've used these, so the Sankey diagrams, the circle diagrams, and really the radial tree diagrams, to discover and curate patterns and hypotheses about the range of conceptual interpretations. And that's where we'll leave it. Thank you.